Hi everyone, my name is Krauss. I'm a research advisor for WIS Academy and facilitator of the research capacity building workshops. Welcome to the WIS Academy YouTube channel where we empower researchers with tools to excel in their work. In today's video, I will talk about how to write your thesis in such a way that you can help your reader read. So if you're busy with a doctoral study or a master's study, and you're in the writing up phases, this is the video for you. So stay tuned. Academic writing is a craft. Writing a thesis or a dissertation is actually a very unique craft. There are actually two parts to writing a thesis. The first is that one needs to have the overarching argument. One needs to be able to develop a golden research thread. But then the second part to that is that your writing should actually be crafted. You know, that the argument, the overarching thesis argument should be crafted. In this session, I will talk to how to write to help your readers read your thesis. There's a very particular way, and if you think carefully about this, there are actually three primary readers of your thesis, for most of us at least. You are there, you are one of your readers, hopefully. You got your supervisor, and then your examiners. In terms of yourself, my suggestion here is, and the first point I want to make here is that to be a good writer, you need to test your thesis argument before you submit. Two suggestions that I've got there is that you have to, and this is what I also always tell my students, is try and publish a conceptual paper early on in your thesis so that you can test your problem statement. The second thing is publish your preliminary findings. Test your thesis argument towards the end of your thesis. It's really useful to do those because what you don't want is that the first time when this argument gets out there and the first time that you state your problem is when you submit to your examiners. It's really good advice to actually test those arguments and those problem statements early on at conferences in your field or journals. What is also nice there is there's a very good chance that some of your potential examiners will actually read your problem statement or get to know your thesis argument even before you submit. So it's really a strategy. The second person reading your thesis, as I said, is your supervisor. Now, in terms of working with your supervisors, there's actually like three phases of your writing, and you need to explain to your supervisor where you are at. So if you're early in the process, you're sometimes busy developing ideas. Your arguments are not well-rounded. It's not crafted yet. And so it really helps to tell your supervisor, listen, I'm busy developing ideas. Please look at my ideas. Don't look at my crafting. Don't look at my editing. Sometimes, or at a later phase in your thesis, you might be busy with crafting an argument, and that is where there's actually a imaginary conversation between you, your literature, and your supervisor, and that crafting is like a later phase in your writing. If you're busy with that, tell your supervisor, because what you don't want is that the supervisor, gives advice on the argument and you are actually still busy with developing ideas. If you're busy at the editing phase, tell your supervisor, I'm busy with editing. Please look at the editing side. My argument should be sound. My ideas should be developed, and look at my editing. The third group of people, as I said, is the examiners. Now the examiners are actually the important ones because they are the ones that assess your thesis and will give feedback. Now, there's a very important principle here in thesis writing is that you want to assist your examiner with reading. So there's like 4 points I want to highlight here. The one is that you want to highlight the golden thread or the flow in the argument, or the flow in the text. The second one is you want to build reminders or internal links throughout the text. The third is that you want to write in such a way that you facilitate scanning. And then the fourth one, which actually links to my first point, is that you want to get to know your examiners. Now, maybe I can just stop for a minute here. If you want to get to know your examiners, you have to go and publish. Publish early on, test your ideas, your problem statement, your core findings early on in your thesis project. But what you must remember about an examiner is examiners are very busy people, and a thesis document can vary between like 160 to 250 pages. And it can be a very laborious task to actually read this thesis. For example, an examiner can read your chapter 1 and put it aside for a couple of days and then take chapter 2 and start assessing that. Now, what you don't want is to make it difficult for your examiner to actually remember what he or she read in the first chapter. So what you need is actually ways of reminding the examiner what you have done. Highlight the golden thread and facilitate scanning, as I said. So the question then is, how do I highlight the golden thread, the flow of the argument? How do I build in reminders for the examiner, and how can I facilitate scanning? Because at the end of the day, you want to make it easier for your examiner to follow the logic. Now, the first principle, the first point I want to make is that you can use advanced organisers. Advanced organisers are key moments in your thesis, like for example at the end of a chapter 1, like the example here, where you have a thesis structure section. In that thesis structure section, you would then explain to your examiner, you will provide like a reading roadmap as to what chapter 2 will cover, what chapter 3 will cover, what chapter 4 will cover, and so on. That really prepares the examiner for what lies ahead. Another tool that one could use is to, for example, use a diagram at the beginning of each chapter as a way of reminding the examiner what this particular chapter will do in the overall thesis argument and then in the overall structure. These are just like two examples of advanced organisers, but you can use different types of advanced organisers. The second point here is that one can use bulleted lists or numbered lists. Now, the reason why I say bulleted lists and numbered lists is that those numbered lists actually stand out as you scan your dissertation or as you scan your thesis. So what you want is you want to be very selective as to what you put in bulleted lists. Okay. The point about making a thesis argument is you want to really select the best evidence to make your claims. And therefore, in the same way as you try and conceptually, make linkages for your reader, you use visual connections or visual highlights. So a bulleted list or a numbered list can be a way of highlighting this golden thread. And as your examiner scans through your dissertation, reads your table of contents or whatever, those bulleted lists actually stand out. Okay, and so that can help with foregrounding or highlighting the thesis argument. And therefore one needs to be very selective as to what you put in those bulleted lists. You don't want to put stuff in there that's not really core to the argument, because you don't want to highlight something that's not really core to that argument. The third point here is to use descriptive headers. One of the first things that an examiner would do is to actually read your table of contents. And in the table of contents, the examiner will should actually get a very quick picture of this entire flow of this thesis or this flow of this chapter. And so in this example, I actually have two examples from a table of contents. And in there, you can actually, by just reading the table of contents, you can actually see, the flow of the argument through this chapter. And the second example, which is a chapter 7 of one of my PhD students, is also, by looking at those headers, you can actually see the flow of the argument. So having descriptive headers can be very, very useful to help your examiner scan and follow the overarching, flow of your thesis. The fourth suggestion is to use tables and diagrams. Now, in using tables and diagrams, first thing to do to remember is that you need to be very selective as to what you put in those diagrams and tables. Similar to my first point earlier on, is that you don't want to put stuff in tables and diagrams that are not really core to this argument or core to your contribution. Now, in this example, on the left-hand side, there's a diagram that actually shows how the problem relates to all other aspects of the thesis. It's actually called a conceptual net to demonstrate the flow from the second problem claim. So a diagram like that can be sort of a visual cue or a visual tool to help your examiner see the logic in kind of a quick scan or a quick glance, looking at, scanning through your dissertation. The second example is an example from data. Now, in this case, there's actually, much more data, but very selectively, and this comes from my own thesis, I chose data to really make a core argument. There's a lot of other data, but I selected something to illustrate the point, select the best data moments to make those claims. And so this really stands out as you read through your thesis, and obviously now for the examiner. The fifth point that I would suggest is using transition sentences and paragraphs. Now, a good place to put that would be typically at the beginning of the chapter. Now, in this example, you can see there's a transition paragraph where the reader, when starting chapter 2, can actually be reminded of what happened in chapter 1. And now, to come back to the example that I mentioned where the examiner would put a thesis aside for a couple of days and come back. If an examiner now starts here with chapter 2, there's a quick reminder of what happened in the previous chapter. So this can be an example of a transition paragraph. A very useful tool to actually help your reader follow these connections between different sections, different chapters. In the second example, built into the text, there's actually links to different sections. Now, what that does is it helps the examiner see the golden thread running through chapter 1 to the current chapter, because that also comes from a chapter 2, the same as on the left, and also how that link flows through to chapters 3, chapter 4, and chapter 5 and chapter 6. So using that sort of thing is really useful to help make those connections. So I hope this was useful. I'm Dr. Krauss, Research Advisor for Worldwide Information Services and the WIS Academy.